Welcome back to part 2 of our 3-part webinar series. In this webinar, we're going to be covering the pre-planning stage of the project, so once we've already won the project. If you missed last week's webinar or the first webinar, it's on our YouTube channel, and I'll briefly cover that in a little bit. Today I'm going to be covering the pre-planning stage, which I'll also go into in a little bit. Next week we'll close out with the third Erector webinar on November 20th at 10:30 a.m. Central Standard Time. We're going to cover when the steel starts arriving to the site and how we can start keeping track of this information and sending it back to the fabrication model so that it's always up to date. I can quickly run reports, and then we'll also be able to get a great visual for everyone to see out in the field. So the pre-planning stage. Once I've been awarded the job, then I can start planning out my erection sequences and utilize more of the crane tools. I can put crane placements on my erection drawings. Then I can send out an IFC file of the model to Fortosi, which will be SDS2's load planning solution, and make sure that it meets the truck loader's requirements before the steel's been fabricated. I can then load it onto the truck that I want and make sure that it meets the requirements such as height and weight. So just to recap last week, I wanted to find the heaviest piece of steel in my model to make sure that my crane placement was going to be closest to that. I was able to see my liftable members. I could have multiple crane placements, or I can even have multiple cranes and placements on my job. I added in the crawler crane on this one, but I could have also added in a tower or a truck crane as well. I was able to send out my prefabrication to BidWizard to get an accurate representation of how much it would cost to erect this. Then I can take my fabrication model and can compare the two of how much it would cost to erect this with my fabrication model and my prefabrication model. Now I'm going to go ahead and jump back into my model to start my pre-planning phase. So the first thing that I want to do is see in my model what can be shop assembled. I've already created an assembly for this purpose, so I can go ahead and load this in there. And I'm going to use this later on as well, but maybe I want to find the center of mass. So the center of mass is going to include all of the members that I have there, and it's also going to include the shop bolts. So just in case I need this later, I'm going to go ahead and add a note in my model with this weight on here. Now that I have that, I can start creating my erection sequences. So this isn't going to affect my piece marks at all, but this is going to help the erector. So maybe I want this first one to just be erection sequence 1. And then I'll come down a little bit lower and I'll create my bottom one as erection sequence 2. Now that I have those set up, maybe I want to see what these look like inside of my model. I can just go ahead and apply a status filter here. And now I have everything that's in sequence 1 to be cyan and everything in erection sequence 2 to be magenta. I can even send this out as a 3D PDF and it can be color coded, so I could send this out to maybe my actual erector that's out in the field. They can view this on their tablet. And I'm just going to open this up in Bluebeam to see. I can also view this in SDS2's free viewer if I were on site too. As you can see, everything's color coded. I can rotate around in that model. I can also take properties from those pieces of steel. Now that I have that, I can also start running reports, so I can run my ship mark and weight report and just easily open this up in Excel, and maybe I want everything in my whole sequence 1, my fabrication sequence 1. And then I can start seeing how these look. I can sort by, maybe I want to see everything that's in my erection sequence 1, the description that I want. Maybe I want all of my beams to show up. I can see my length, the description, and then the piece marks. And I have that report, so since I'm running reports, I'm just going to keep going with this. I can run a field bolt summary report. I could send this out to Excel, but I'm just going to do this quickly just to see the field bolt summary that's needed for this job. And also, maybe I want to run a field bolt point to point. I'll get into the field bolt point to point later in the third one, but it's great for checking off connections too. A lot of our customers use that. Again, I can open this up in Excel. I'm just doing a quick screen one for time permitting purposes. Now I'm able to start running more crane tools. I was able to start running some of these in my first webinar, but now I can really start diving deeper. So I can do the show liftable members again. You just select your crane placement. The green is going to be that it passes at the pick and set points. The orange is going to be a critical lift according to OSHA regulations. And then the red, it means it's either failed at the pick or the set points. So the first one that I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can pick up that heaviest member. So I went ahead and loaded that heaviest member from the first one, and I can modify any of my lift configurations at any time. For this one, let's go ahead and set that to main, and I'll go ahead and see if this passes, and it passes at my pick and my set points. Since that passed, I'm going to assign that to my crane placement. Now I'm going to go ahead and select some more members here. I'm just going to do pie selection so I can select what I want. I can also hide if I don't want to see my hidden members, or maybe I don't want to see my critical lifts either. So since I added those, then you can start managing your crane placement lifts. So here's all of the steel that I selected in here for this crane placement. I can modify that lift configuration, or I can also view if it passed at the pick and set points. If it did happen to fail, I can still assign it to lift since you are in charge of this. So we don't take obstructions along the way into consideration. We also don't take into consideration the length of the rope in between the multi-lifts, which I'm about to get to. I also want to see if my assembly can be lifted with this crane placement. If I select all of them, then it's going to be in an assembly all together as one, so it'll all get picked up at once. And it does look like it's going to pass at my pick and set points, so I can assign that. In my managed lifts, it will show up as an assembly up at the top there. I talked about multi-lifts, so also Christmas treeing. So I can pick what I want for my multi-lift if I add, and then I can start selecting them either from the model, or I can also start selecting them from this list. If I do the Christmas treeing, if it's going to pass or not, and it did, so I can assign that to a lift or the crane placement, and it's also going to show up as a multi-lift. So now what about all the other non-steel lifts like decking, concrete panels, and so on? This is going to be where the load lifts are going to come into play. So I'm going to go ahead and put 3,000 in for my bundle for decking. And I can modify my pick point, but I'm just going to leave everything alone and set maybe it up on my roof. I'll go ahead and assign that since it passed, and if I go to my manage lifts, it's going to be user defined and it's going to say decking. Now I'd probably want to add in another crane placement at this time, but you get the gist of it. So each crane again can have as many placements as required. So now that I have this, I can now start detailing my erection views. I want to actually see the crane placement on my erection views, so we do have options for this if you want to see those. I can then send these out to the field so that they know where the crane placement should go instead of guessing, since we already have these laid out. Along with adding in my crane placements, I also put my furthest laydown point. So it's going to say what crane it's attached to, and then also the furthest laydown point. Once I zoom in here, it's going to say what crane placement that associates with. Now that I have those on there, I can now start assigning the order of erection so that everyone can see how this is going to go up in the field. The order will automatically start to show up in the model, and I can always override this manually. I'll then want to send this information back to my detailer so that they can see the order of erection, and I can also send this to Fortosi, our SDS2's load planning software, so that they know how to load this on and off the truck. Once I start adding this in, you can see that I have 6, 7, and 8 here in my model, and it's going to show the order of erection automatically. I can always override this, like I stated before. It's going to be where we did the erection sequence, but this was just an automatic tool that we had. Now that I have that information, I can send this back to my detailer so that they can always keep the fabrication model up to date. Just want to update my status information here. Then the next step is sending this IFC model out to Fortosi. Fortosi is going to be that load planning software that I started talking about. You don't need to necessarily have an SDS2 IFC file, but in this case it works really smooth for my process. I'm going to do my entire sequence 1 and include everything, and then the IFC properties are going to have a lot of stuff in them in this deal, so I opened up Fortosi. I'm going to select that IFC file, and then I can start filtering down what I do and don't want to see, since that IFC file contains so much information. You will want to do an IFC 2x3 because it's going to contain the most information. Now, I kind of want to start loading on my highest order of erection first onto my truck. So I'm going to just start filtering this. I wanted to filter my columns. Maybe here's all of the properties that I have here. I also want to filter, I just want to see erection sequence 1. And I'm going to go even further, and I just want to see my columns 6 and 7 for my order of erection. Because I knew those were my biggest columns. So what I really like is that the steel doesn't have to be fabricated before I start loading it onto the truck. So kind of think of it as Tetris or even a puzzle of making sure that everything fits, but you also want to make sure that it's safe. I would much rather lift this mouse and see it visually on my software than have to constantly lift up a piece of steel to make sure that it fits on the truck. So I'm going to go ahead and start loading on my first trailer here. You can create however many trailers that you want. And let's say, yeah, I just put a back one. You do have the center of gravity, so as I start adding on the pieces of steel, the center of gravity is going to update. Now right now it's saying that it's not going to fit on this truck, but once it turns green, it's going to say that it fits there. I can automatically load, or I can manually. So in this case, I'm just doing a really quick example. We do have already a webinar on Fortosi on our Fortosi software YouTube page. And so that goes way more in depth, and you can also schedule a demo as well. And so let's just say, for time permitting purposes, I'll just create these two and I just say that these are shipped. And then I can start doing a bill of lading, and I could also do a load map. So the first one I'll do is the bill of lading just for this current trailer. I can do as many trailers as I want. So the bill of lading, and then I'll quickly go ahead and create my load map too. Now the bill of lading is just going to tell me the pieces of steel and the description that's on there. And then my load map will show the load map of the actual trailer, an ISO of that trailer, and also an elevation view, the weight at the hitch, the weight at the first axle, and the second axle. So again, I'm doing a really, really brief overview of Fortosi, but it kind of just fit into my flow here. So now that I have those two loaded on there, Then let's say I was coming in here and let's just say I'm in my detailer or my fabricator's model and I can type in my load number and I can then send that information back to my erector so everyone's on the same page and everyone knows what that load number is. That concludes today's webinar on the pre-planning phase, which was the second part of our three-part Erector series. Today we covered breaking down the Erector sequencing, utilizing more crane tools. I was able to actually put that crane placement on drawings, and then I was able to send out my 3D model information into reports and to the load planning software of Fortosi. So I'll now give you a few moments to type in your questions.